this morning in John chapter 11. And before we begin, I just want to talk, this is my yearly rant, and I'm not going to talk about this anymore for the year, but I want to talk about Hallmark movies. And some of you who know me know how much I can't stand the Hallmark movie channel. Some of you may love it, and I don't understand it, but whatever you want to do is cool. But I cannot stand Hallmark movies, and for not just because of the bad acting. Put that in a box over here, that's enough, But they're all the same movie. It's exactly the same. Some guy, is in a small town, and he comes back, and this other lady comes back, and the town's about to go under, because they're going to close it down because they hate Christmas, and they want to sell the town to a developer for billions of dollars, and the lady works for this company, and then the guy commits her, they fall in love. Then they have this problem, they leave, and one goes to the airport, and they catch at the airport, and then they fall in love, and it's all happily ever after. That's pretty much all of them, right? Did I miss anything? No. So I cannot stand them for this main reason, is that it does not represent reality in the slightest. And some of you are like, well, that's why I watch them, because it's not reality. So this is my wife. Right? She's like, well, I don't want to watch real stuff, because it's too hard. I don't want to watch that. This is good. It's got happy endings and everything in it. I cannot stand them. But the truth is, we deal with things in life that are hard, that are difficult, suffering, pain, challenge, loss, so many things. Life is hard, right? As we continue on through life, if you have not faced anything difficult in your life, you will. Maybe not tomorrow, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, you're going to face hard things. And if you're not facing hard things, then you just haven't yet. So just buckle up, because you will. And when we talk about hard things, I think there's a misconception that goes around in Christianity that if I become a follower of Jesus, hard things won't happen to me anymore. I'll be good. I don't have to deal with pain. I don't have to deal with trial. I don't have to deal with suffering. I don't have to deal with hardship. It's all going to be great. And there are some very popular preachers who will come out there and say, hey, if you believe in Jesus, you'll find a good parking spot, you can get a swimming pool of your dreams, and you can get the best things, your best life now, and live it up and be fantastic. But the truth is, life just sometimes, it is hard. It is hard. And Christianity is not something that's surprised by this. Believe it or not, Jesus promises suffering. He promises suffering. But here's the beauty of Christianity. When we face suffering, we don't face it without hope. We face it with hope. We face it with life. We face it with the joy and victory of Jesus on our side. And we still walk through pain and hardship and suffering and grief and trial and all those things, but we don't do it in such a way that we have no hope. We have hope. And this morning, I want us to kind of, maybe you're walking through grief right now. Maybe you have. And you're still struggling with how to deal with suffering and pain in your own life and how to put it in its proper perspective. And you don't know how to process that or deal with that. I hope this morning you'll be able to do that. I've shared the story, and I don't want to make this all about this, but I just want to share just my own personal trial and struggle. In the last 2 years of our life has been one of the hardest in our lives for me and my wife. When my wife was pregnant with our fourth child, we went in the hospital for a 20-week ultrasound, and this is supposed to be a really fun one. You get to see the 3D ultrasound and see the baby, and they're taking all this time to show you the baby, and it's really cool. We've done it with our last 3 kids. So we brought our 3 kids in. We're on our way to St. George to visit my in-laws, and we're going to leave right from the doctor to go visit. So we have this ultrasound, and this tech is really quiet, and she's not saying a whole lot. And we're like, what's going on? Why is she not saying a whole lot? And my wife goes, something's wrong. And she says, is something wrong? And I was like, whoa. What do you mean something's wrong? So the tech says, yeah, there's some things on here that don't look quite right. And I'm just frozen. Totally blindsided, totally caught off guard. This is not what we came into the doctor's office for. We had no expectation that everything just wouldn't be great. And the text says, your baby has spina bifida. And I'm like, I don't even know what this is. I've never heard of that term before. I have no clue. And I just remember just being totally in shock. And all that's going through my mind is, what does this mean? Does this mean my baby's going to live? Like, is she going to have a life? Like, all these thoughts and plans and things that I had thought for my child, all of a sudden are caught in question now. And I just remember being totally just wondering, God, what's going on? What's going on? Well, she's had 6 surgeries on her spine, in her brain. She's doing awesome now, but at the time, I had no idea what any of this was. And through the last 2 years, we've had so many ups and downs, so many surgeries, so many times where we're walking the halls of Primary Children's Hospital, and I'm just praying to God, crying out that he would help my child, that he would heal my baby. I prayed and I prayed that he would take it away, that he'd heal her completely and whole. And he chose not to do that. Does that mean God ceases to be God? Does that mean that God is not the God of heaven and earth who spoke it into existence? Does that mean God doesn't know who we are intimately? Absolutely not. This is the God of all creation. This is the God who loves me enough to send his son Jesus to die on a cross for me because of nothing that I've done. He loves me. He knows me intimately. He knows what you're dealing with. He knows what you're going through. And this story today, when we talk about John chapter 11, is about suffering. Job chapter 13, verse 15, a story again full of suffering. In the first part of Job and the end of Job, you have, there's some more of the story, but most of the chapters in the book are about how Job processes suffering with his friends, how he argues with God, and God basically, he comes down on Job pretty hard at one point. But here's a verse that I just want to read, and then we'll get into John 11. Job 13:15 says, "Though he slay me, I will hope in him, yet I will argue my ways to his face." We're going to feel the human emotion of suffering and pain throughout life. That is not wrong. That is not bad. But where we need to be, where God is hopefully sanctifying us towards, is that though he slay me, yet I will hope in him. I will hope in him. Our hope must be in Jesus. Our hope ultimately is that Jesus has a plan and a purpose for all of it, and that one day, this broken, messed up world will be fully redeemed and brought to him. That he's going to restore and new heavens, new earth, and fix all those things that are messed up and broken in our world. But we have hope in Jesus. And so in John chapter 11, we're going to see how the Son of God, how Jesus deals with pain in his own life. I mean, Jesus is fully human, fully God. He deals with pain. Let's look at John 11, verse 1. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent to him, saying, "Lord, he whom you love is ill." But when Jesus heard it, he said, "This illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, "Let us go to Judea again." I like how John starts out, a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This wasn't just an ordinary guy. As we read throughout the New Testament, Lazarus and Mary and Martha were very close friends of Jesus and his disciples. I mean, there's a lot of background here, background story. It just wasn't just some random dude. Mary and Martha, you've probably seen them before in a couple other places throughout the Gospels. You remember the part where Mary and Martha, they're sitting with Jesus, and Martha realizes there's some tasks that need to be done, so she's like cleaning the dishes, cleaning the house, making sure she's caring for all the things that are going on there. And Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus. She can't get enough of Jesus. She just wants to soak up who Jesus is. And Martha's like, "Jesus, tell Mary to come over here and to clean up. I don't want to do this all myself. She should be helping." And Jesus basically tells her in a calm way, "Hey, Mary is sitting at my feet. She's soaking up who I am. This is a good thing, not a bad thing." And then we know the story of Mary, he says here in verse 2, Mary, who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. There's another story in the Gospels of Jesus is in this house, and there's Pharisees in the house. This is when the Pharisees liked Jesus before they got really hung up on who Jesus was. And this lady comes in, and she takes this bottle of a very expensive, costly perfume, and she breaks it and wipes it on the feet of Jesus and washes it with her hair. And again, you think in those times, your feet were not the most clean things in the world. It's not like they have Nikes running around back in those days, and animals would poop in the road. And so you're walking all through this stuff all over the place. Your feet are gross. They're disgusting. They're very dirty. Mary takes her hair, and she wipes very costly perfume and cleans Jesus' feet with them, showing the value and just love for Jesus. I mean, just the love for Jesus and who he is. So this is the kind of closeness that they have, that they're close friends. I mean, they almost feel like family. And Lazarus is ill. Lazarus is sick. Now, just think about this. If you are Mary and Martha, you've seen Jesus just do some amazing things. What has he done so far? He's healed blind men. He's fed 5,000 people. He's turned water into wine. I mean, healing sickness and disease. And then you go, wait a second. I know how my brother can be safe. I remember when we found out, finally kind of wrestled with my daughter's diagnosis, what did I do? I'm going on the internet, and I'm researching spina bifida, and I'm researching what can we do to help her? What can we do? And I'm reading medical journals. I'm just pouring out everything, every bit of my energy and time into trying to figure out how I can help my daughter. All I want to do, all I can think about is how I can help her have a better outcome for her life. So I'm poring over these medical journals, and I find, that there's a place in Texas that has this experimental surgery. I'm looking for anything that I can do to help her. Same way, if you have Jesus right there, what are you not like? Hey, Jesus, I need you to come immediately, now. Rush over here. My brother's sick. I know you can heal him and you can help him. Just come in here, speak, and he'll be healed, because that's the kind of power that you have. We need you to come right now. You'd be doing the same exact thing. And just feeling the compassion and heart there. And again, this is not just some random guy, but a guy, what do they say? Lord, he whom you love is ill. He whom you love. This guy, Lazarus, is somebody that you love. We want you to help him, to heal him. In verse 4, when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now you got to think, Jesus is fully human and fully God. He's both. Philippians chapter 2, we see that Jesus became as a servant. And so Jesus had to kind of limit himself, his divinity, so that he can operate in his humanity. So we don't know if Jesus knows what's going to happen here. He doesn't know, if this illness, maybe it will lead to death, maybe it won't. Maybe God the Father is telling him and giving him a word on this. But Jesus is operating as a fully human. And this is something that we should understand and be thankful for. It's not like he goes, I'm half human, half God. He's fully 100% human, and he's fully 100% God. So to be fully 100% human, what do we have? We are limited in strength, power, knowledge, sovereignty, all these things. But yet God is what? All-powerful, all-knowledgeable, all-present, all-sovereign. I mean, he's over all things and for all things. So in Christology, the nature of Jesus, we have God, the Son of God, fully man, and yet he is a perfect human sacrifice. So he's fully human. So he suffers through pain. He feels the emotions that we feel as humans. He has every bit of humanity. Any kind of diminishment, either of Jesus' humanity or any diminishment of his divinity, is heresy. He's fully human. He's fully God. So if Jesus limits his divinity while he's on the earth, we don't know what he knew or didn't know about what was going on here. Did he know this is going to lead to death, at least at this point? Not sure. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. We don't see enough in the text to really give us a good indication. Later we find out that he does seem to know Lazarus is going to die, or he did die, but we don't know at this point. The Bible doesn't tell us. So this kind of puzzling statement, this illness does not lead to death, but the one thing he does say, it is for the glory of God so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. When we look at pain and suffering and trials, what do we typically pray? God, take it away. God, remove it. God, make it better. Like I said, I prayed many, many hours for my child that she would be fully healed, knowing that the God of heaven who created heaven and earth could do it in an instant if he wanted to. He absolutely could. But the truth is, I wasn't praying, at least initially, God, well, whatever you want to do, you can do it. I may have said those things, but in my heart, I'm just asking God to heal her. I'm asking God to take this away. As human beings, we're so caught up in this thing of comfort, and we pursue comfort as if it's an end in and of itself. We follow comfort, we follow comfort, we follow comfort, and when life gets hard, we run away. We don't want to deal with suffering. We don't want to deal with trial and problems and pain because it hurts, and we don't want to deal with hurt, so we run from hurt. What if God actually wants to use suffering in your life to bring about his end, his glory, and for our good? What if he's trying to do that through your life right now? And he wants to use that. What kinds of things does that bring about? When you just think about it, when you're in suffering and pain, what are you thinking about? You're realizing the limits of yourself. I realized with this whole process with my daughter that I cannot control her outcome. Even in the medical world, like I had this whole view that they knew everything about everything and that they were the experts, and they are, and there's some incredible people, incredible surgeons and incredible doctors, but we are still so limited in what we know. And I wanted to control it. I wanted to make it happen. I wanted to fix it. I wanted to solve it. I just wanted to be what any dad would do in that situation. And you're trying so hard. And yet, Jesus says this is for the glory of God. What if we saw our pain? What if we saw our suffering in such a way where we say, God, how can this bring you glory? How can you use this? How can I be a willing servant for you to let this pain mold me and make me into your servant to see this glorify your name all throughout the earth, all throughout the world? Then the next thing that happened is kind of weird. Verse 5. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so we see his love for them. But then he says, so when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Just seems really puzzling, right? Like, he loves Lazarus, he loves Mary and Martha, but what does he do? He stays longer. He's not rushing over to help Lazarus. He's not rushing over to heal him. And one of the hardest parts, I think, for us is not just the outcome we want from God, but it's also the timing we want from God. You ever just ask God, God, I want you to do this right now? How often does that happen? Where God just answers it, your prayer, the exact way in your timing. Just think for a second, if that's how God worked, who's actually God here? You and me are the ones calling the shots. What if God's like, hey, I've got something bigger going on here that's bigger than you, and it's something that's more magnificent than you, and I want to do something in my way, in my time, just to show you how great and powerful that I am. I think God often does that. He's casting this bigger narrative for us to show his glory and how powerful and amazing that he is. God's timing. The timing of God's working or lack of working through suffering in our lives is not an accident. The timing of God's working or lack of working through suffering in our lives is not an accident. God's not just haphazardly going about all creation, just like, oh, what do I do now? I don't know what's going on. It's all purposeful. There is a purpose in your pain. There is a point to your pain. God's not being sadistic. He's not out there just trying to hurt you. God has a purpose through everything that he does to bring about his end and his glory. It's purposeful. The timing there. I think like my kids, and I ask them to clean their room, they usually have a different understanding of the timing of when I'm asking them to clean the room and when I expect it and when they actually get it done. They're thinking never, like I don't really want it done. I'm just speaking. I don't know. I was like, can you clean your room? And they act like they don't hear me. I don't know. Maybe you guys had that, parents. And you go, no, I mean like right now. I want this done. I want this done right now. I'm not asking for this tomorrow or never, right now. And sometimes we treat God that way. Like, God, I want you to do this in my time. Obviously, you don't hear me. You need to get this done. God's not our child. He created you. He created me. His purposes, his plan is perfect. We're the ones that have the problem. It's not God. God's timing is perfect. So what if we said instead of, God, can you take this away? God, what are you trying to do through this? What are you trying to teach me? What are you trying to use this for? How can I be a better instrument for your purposes? How can I be willing and pliable to be molded for your sake? And God, what are you trying to do in me? What are you trying to help create in me? Maybe you're trying to purify me, make me stronger, make me more dependent and trusting in you. These are all good things that God wants to sanctify in us, that our character, that our life living for Jesus would be purified through trial and suffering. And he goes on to explain through this idea that he's the light of the world in verse 8. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? So remember, he says, I'm going to Judea. The last several chapters, if you haven't been with us, Jesus has said some very difficult things to the Jews and Pharisees. So much so where he says, I'm the Son of God. And they're like, wait a second, that's blasphemy. We're going to stone you. He says, you're not a part of my sheep. Like, hey, you're not with me. You're not of God. These are things that ticked off the crowds. They did not want to hear this. So the disciples are saying, Jesus, don't go back there. They actually already had picked up rocks ready to throw them at Jesus. They are going to do it again. They're going to throw them at you. We can't have this. They're going to kill you. Jesus' response is great. He says in verse 9, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. So he's like, there's 12 hours in a day. And again, you got to think in ancient world, you did everything then. You didn't have flashlights you're running around with and things like that, and all these lights and everything else that we have. He just remember he came back from the Festival of Lights and talking about Hanukkah and the festival rededication of the temple. And so it's like, hey, I'm the light of the world. If you're going to walk, why would you not walk in light? If you're walking in dark, what's going to happen? You're going to trip. I think Nick was sharing this a couple of weeks ago. What do you do when you're walking in the middle of the night and you leave something out, or your kids do, and you step on it like Legos or whatever, and it's like, oh, it just like breaks your ankle, or you kick your shin on something. I mean, we walk in the night, we stumble. But we walk in the light, and all of a sudden we can see. Jesus is saying, I'm not afraid of what any man can do to me. It's fine. Jesus came to the world, took on humanity for a purpose. He came to suffer and die on the cross for our sins, to pay the ultimate price for them. And this was, again, not an accident. This was all a part of his grand plan and intention. Everything that he had done was up to this point was all part of the plan. All part of the plan. So when he goes to the cross, and we'll see this in a couple of chapters, this was all a part of the plan and purpose. Again, his timing was a part of this, but he's not afraid of what man can bring to him, what man can do to him. And I think one of the biggest problems with us when it comes to suffering and it comes to anxiety and all these things, what we do is we worry. Worry. The Bible actually talks about worry being a sin. And you're like, whoa, really? Worry being a sin? And yeah, Jesus is like, how can you even add an inch to your height by worrying? Can you worry enough and then all of a sudden fix all these things going on? No. What worry does is it's an attempt by us to control our life. It's an attempt by you and me to control our life and the outcomes in which we want to achieve. Just for a second, if you think like, okay, if I did X, Y, and Z and get A, B, and C in return, and A, B, and C are good things, and you're pretty certain that's going to happen, you're going to do X, Y, and Z to get that outcome. We are people who like control. A lot of times you'll hear the phrase that people don't like change, and that's not true. They just don't like change they can't control. But if it's the change you can control, and it brings about the outcome in which you want, you're probably going to be okay with that change. In fact, you'll be like, yeah, that's great. That's going to be beneficial to me. I'm good with that change. It's not change that's the problem. It's the ability to control things which is the problem. Because you and me, we like to think that we're gods who have control over our lives and the rest of the universe. And when we can't control it, oh no, that's not good. I can't do that. And we worry and we have anxiety and fear of man and what man can do to us. And the truth is, we're putting ourselves in God's shoes. We are the ones exalting ourselves as demigods, thinking that we have the ability to control the outcome of our life, and we just don't. And once we realize that we are 100% dependent upon the creator of the universe, life all of a sudden has a different perspective for us. Because then, when unexpected things happen, we're not depending on ourselves to solve the problem, but we realize that the God of all creation is in charge of the whole thing, and we are a part of his plan, and he has chosen to use us for his glory. And once we can wrap our minds around that, the unexpected suffering and pain of this world all of a sudden doesn't seem so terrible. I remember when we went to this surgery in Houston to think we can get this surgery, we had like a 2 to 4 week window. I think it was 2 weeks at this point. And we had 2 weeks to get the surgery done. And if we missed the window, we could not have the surgery. So we fly to Houston. I mean, we had like a couple days to make this decision. It was like, okay, let's just go. And we had to figure it out on the way, like where we're going to stay and what we're going to do and all the things that we had to do, the logistics to make it work. So we fly to Houston at Texas Children's Hospital. And we go in, and they do all kinds of tests on my wife, ultrasounds, and they're doing genetic testing and blood testing, and just one scan after the next scan after the next scan. And again, I had read really good things. It's like a laparoscopic surgery. They can do her repair on her back where basically her spine was open in the womb. And they wanted to kind of close it up and basically for healing, and then it gives her time to heal in the womb so there's a better outcome for her later. So I had read that this is the top-notch, the highest, researched clinical trials and all this other stuff that was out there. This was it. This was the best of the best that was out there. And so we went down, and we went through all the testing, and at the very end of that, neurosurgeon comes in the room, doctor comes in the room, and he says, "I'm sorry to say, but your daughter is too small. We don't feel comfortable with doing the surgery because we think something else may be going on. It's wrong, and if we do the surgery, we may cause more harm than good." Neurosurgeon leaves, and me and my wife just cry. We're just thinking like, man, we flew all the way down here. All of our hopes are in this surgery, that our outcome for our daughter, and this is the best that we can do. And we can't do it. And we flew back home just totally devastated. Just totally demoralized and devastated. And I'm praying to God, why is this happening? Why is this going on? Why can't we help our child? We get back to the University of Utah, and they do some scans, and they go, actually, your daughter's really bigger than what they were saying. And so we started like trying to figure out, could we maybe change it, go back? But we had missed our window in that time. So we couldn't do the surgery. And I just remember thinking like, all because of their mistake, like we can't get this done? Like, what's going on? And I just remember being so mad, and I was angry, and I was frustrated at doctors, and I was frustrated at what I thought was incompetence on their part. And I wanted to just like lay into one of them, and just tell them like, what are you doing? You're like hurting my daughter's future. Like this is all that's going through my mind is her whole life is before her, and this was her shot. And you've messed it up. It's gone. It's ruined. And I remember thinking, once I finally came to my senses, and God kind of shook me up and said, who do you think created the universe? You don't think I know what's going on with your daughter? And God got a hold of me and made me realize that he was the one in control of my life. He was the one in control of her life. He was the one ordering her steps. He's the one sovereign over her. And that all that he was doing, he was going to bring about an end that would bring him glory. And once I could finally get into the place of going, God, I trust you. I trust you. All of a sudden, my perspective changed, and the way that I dealt with that changed. For so many of us, our perspective has to change in the way in which we see suffering and pain. Instead of seeing it as though we are the ones in control of those outcomes. And true, there's a lot there of suffering and things like that we cause on ourselves because of bad decisions and choices. I'm not talking about that. That's there, right? We bring a lot of this on ourselves in different things that we do. And sometimes in life, you just walk through things that you just have zero control over. You have zero control over if you get the diagnosis of cancer. What do you do with that? You have to walk through that, trusting God along the way and trusting that God's got a plan and He's going to use it for His glory, that bright perspective. He is the light of the world. We don't walk in fear of man or fear of anything else that life can bring of us because we have the light of the world. We walk openly and through these trials because we know that God's going to bring about His end that glorifies His name. Third thing we see here is that suffering is for our good. Look in verse 11. After saying these things, He said to them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him." The disciples said to Him, "Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover." So Jesus says something really interesting to the guys. He's like, Lazarus has fallen asleep. I have to go to wake him up. They're like, "Well, why do you need to go to wake him up, Jesus? I mean, if he just needs to be woken up, what does wake him up when we get I don't understand." And so then He has to say in verse 13, "Now Jesus had spoken of His death, but they thought that He meant taking rest and sleep." It's like, He's talking about death. He's not talking about sleeping. Verse 14, then Jesus told them plainly, "Lazarus has died." I think sometimes we just need to be told things plainly. A lot of times we're just like so thick and so stubborn, like we just need to hear the words straight to us so we understand what's going on. Verse 15, "And for your sake, I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe." For your sake, I was glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. Now just think about what He's saying. At this point, Jesus is saying, I'm going to go bring him back from the dead. And I'm glad that you were not there when Lazarus was dying, because I'm about to do something so cool and so amazing that you would have missed it had you gotten what you wanted. And so many times, God's like, you don't even know what I'm about to do through this pain and suffering right now. I'm about to do something so cool, so amazing, so that when you look back on this one day, you can't help but admit how God was over it all and how God was just working out something incredible here. And so that you may believe. God often brings suffering into our lives because He wants us to see what He's about to do on the other side. And again, this is not a promise that God's going to bring about the person that maybe got cancer. It doesn't mean maybe you don't get healing from that. Maybe not. It's not a promise there. But what we do know is that God has something greater for us than we could ever imagine. I just can't even begin to tell you how many just awesome things have come from my daughter. I mean, even just the words she says, and she's only 18 months old. And just to hear her talk and say daddy and to say mama and to say all the things she's saying. And then she's walking, holding on to these little PVC pipe things I built. And she's watching her walk. Yesterday, going to the kitchen, and we have this stool that kind of goes to the top to pick up, you can get stuff on top because Lindsay's a lot shorter than I am. So I put stuff on the top shelf. She needs to be able to reach it. So Joey is climbed up on the counter because that's what boys do. They climb all over stuff. And then my Caroline is on the top step of this stool. And she had climbed up the top step of the stool. And I'm like, did someone put her there? So I take her off, bring Lindsay in, put her on the floor. Watch her climb up these steps. And I'm just like, I videoed it, and I must have watched the video like 10 to 15 times. And I'm crying, I'm watching this video, I'm just like, God, you're so good. You're so good. You didn't have to do any of this, but you did. God often wants to bring about something that's much better than we can ever imagine, even in suffering and pain, if we just would embrace it. And God, what do you want to teach me? What do you want to show me? What do you want to do with this? I know for me, it brought about a sense of, I just need to trust God. I need to be dependent on Him. I am dependent on Him, whether I admit it or not. But just me acknowledging that, understanding that, puts me in a place where no matter what life throws at me, I don't have to have my emotions go up and down like a roller coaster. and be so caught up in despair and misery. But God, you're in control and you got this. Suffering is for our good. And then verse 16, Thomas's response, which is so much like us, right? So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, "Let us also go that we may die with him." You can hear the sentiment there. I mean, this is obviously, if you lose somebody very close to you, that makes you feel like, man, I don't know how I'm going to do life without them. And Thomas, you can see his feeling there, his human emotion and response. Let's just die with him. Like, we lost Lazarus, our buddy, our friend. What else do we have? And finally, our hope is in the resurrection. Hope in the resurrection. Let's look in verse 17. Now, when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. So now, here's kind of the cool thing about the story. Jesus waited in where he was at for how long? 2 days. So even if he had rushed over, Lazarus still would have died, because he'd only been dead 2 days at that point. And even in the grand scheme of things, right? Like, that's all hindsight. But in the front side of that, you start thinking, God, what's going on? God knows what's going on. He knows the big picture. He knows the grand narrative. He knows all that's happening there, and even here in the story. Verse 18, Bethany was near Jerusalem. So another cool thing, Bethany literally means house of suffering. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him. But Mary remained seated in the house. So Martha, again, is the one who comes out to meet Jesus. Mary's sitting in the house. I don't know if she's mad, maybe Jesus didn't get there in time. Like, hey, why couldn't you have been here? You could have helped him. And now you're finally here, but it's too late. Maybe Mary's mad. I don't know. The Bible doesn't tell us about what she's feeling. Verse 21, Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." Jesus, I know you could have helped him, but now I also know whatever you ask of God, he's going to give you. Verse 23, Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." So he's saying, hey, your brother's going to rise again. And she's thinking, something maybe a little bit different than what he's saying. Verse 24, Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Saying, I know that there's not just this life, that one day he will rise again after all this is said and done. In verse 25, Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." Jesus points it back to himself. I'm the resurrection and life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. He's talking about a bigger picture here than just this present day. And for so many of us, we live for the moment. The moment. Our decisions in life, the things we do, are all based around our present comfort. And we will follow comfort and chase it and chase it and chase it. And what happens? You still deal with pain. You still deal with suffering. You still can't get through that pain and suffering and don't know how in the world that you are to get through that pain and suffering. Because you're constantly chasing comfort, and it's an idol that you'll never catch. And we live for the moment, but with eternity in perspective. What if we understood our life, again, as a resource, just like we would money, time, anything else, and realize that we have a short time span. Every day that we have is precious, and it's a gift, and it's a resource, and you can choose how you want to spend it. You can spend it in light of eternity, understanding that it's not just for today, but it's forever. Or you can live it for the moment, and you can live it chasing comfort and your ability to try to control all that's going on in life, and then fall short every time. That point is up to you. What are you going to do with the resource that God has entrusted to you? How are you going to take those things like suffering and pain and trial, all of those things that we walk through in life? God does not want to waste your pain. He does not intend to waste your pain. He wants to use it for your glory, for his glory. But we're the ones who are always like, man, all I can see is right in front of my face, right in front of my face. And I see this with my kids all the time, and it's just, again, kids are just small versions of us. You know, we're the same way, but it's so hard to get kids to realize that the decisions they're making, when it comes to things they eat. That, of course, Halloween's just here, so, they would love to go through a whole, bag of candy, and the thing is, I probably could too, if I let myself, because I'm just like my kids. And you think about we always think short term, instead of how does this affect us forever in light of eternity? But how do we do that? How do you do that? Are you chasing that idol of comfort? He asked her, do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. It's kind of interesting. One of the only places in Scripture you see someone else recognize Jesus as the Son of God. And when Peter recognized Jesus as the Son of God, what does he say? The Holy Spirit has revealed this to you, that Jesus is the Son of God. And when we look at who we serve, our King of the universe, we follow him, we follow his commands, we follow his orders. We're under shepherds under him, and we follow after what he's called us to do. But I think with suffering, whenever we walk through that, it just tends to kind of bring the rubber that meets the road. Because a lot of us can say that we follow Jesus. A lot of us can do the right things and check the right boxes and have everything in order. We can look the part. But when you go through suffering, it brings out your real theology. It brings out your real feelings. It brings out your real faith. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. And for us, when we walk through trials, you will reveal your faith. If your faith is in yourself or your faith is in the God of all creation, it will be revealed. And for some of you here today, you may be walking through suffering right now. Right now. And this may be a lot of pain for you even just to be walking through even in today. God wants to use your pain for his good, his glory, and for your good. Are you letting him do that? And for those of you who maybe be holding on to some past hurts, maybe things that you've been holding on to for a long, long, long time, how do you lay those things at the feet of Jesus? How do you see things in an eternal perspective and understanding that those hurts, those pains that you're walking through, God wants to use them. How do you let them go? And realize that life still hurts. We can't get rid of the hurt. We still have the feeling. Feeling's there. But how do we put it in the right perspective so that we can say just like Job, though he slay me, yet I will hope in him. Let's pray.